Unbroken, the podcast with Madeline Black, healing through storytelling.
Hello and welcome to Unbroken, the podcast with me, Madeline Black, where I am speaking to people that I've met along my way who have been through trauma, but they've also recovered and they now are resilient, and they have been on a journey with it. And today my guest is no exception. Today I'm speaking to Geoff Thompson. He is 60 and he lives in Coventry in the West Midlands. He has published 50 books. Some of his work in the self-help genre has been translated into 21 languages, and he's been on the Sunday Times bestseller list many times. His first book, Watch My Back, detailing his experience working as a nightclub bouncer in Coventry for over a decade, hit the Sunday Times bestsellers list. It was made into a stage play and adapted into a BAFTA-nominated short film starring Ray Winstone and a BIFA-nominated motion picture for cinema. He's also written articles for national magazines and broadsheets, including The Times, Men's Fitness, QH and FHM. He works as a playwright, which started when he was invited to join the Royal Court Young Writers Group. He has gone on to write many successful plays that have toured nationally and internationally. His stage musical, Will Live and Die in These Towns, was produced and performed to great acclaim at the Belgrade Theatre in Coventry in 2018, and it's in the process of being adapted to film. He is also a BAFTA-winning screenwriter, penning multiple award-winning films for luminaries such as Ray Winstone, Paddy Considine, Orlando Bloom, Maxine Peake, Anne Reid, Alison Steadman, and James Cosmo. His most recent feature film, Retaliation, starring Orlando Bloom, is currently receiving great acclaim in the US. It is a muscular biopic about the metaphysical power of forgiveness. He is also one of the world's highest-ranking martial arts teachers, an 8th Dan. The prestigious Black Belt magazine USA polled him as the most influential martial artist in the world since Bruce Lee. Geoff's latest books, Notes from a Factory Floor, which is his memoir, and The Divine CEO, were released in 2020. Welcome, Geoff, to the program. Wow, what a bio. You've certainly packed a lot in your 60 years, haven't you?
Took up half the program.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when I wrote Notes from a Factory Floor, I said to my wife, I just can't believe what we fitted in. I can't believe the amount of things we fitted in that short period of time, because most of them, all the books, the plays, the films, the teaching, I did like 40 instructional videos. And I was teaching courses all over the country, but they were all running concurrently, but they all, I don't know how we did it. I said the reason I was so intimidated, or one of the reasons I was so intimidated about writing Notes from a Factory Floor, because I just think I wouldn't be able to remember it, or it wouldn't make sense, because it was concurrent. It was all happening at the same time. I realised later that I was abused when I was a kid. Later, because of my levels of inquiry, I triggered a spiritual epiphany, and I realised that this energy that I had was part of it. Part of it was a gift from the abuse, because I had a reservoir of rage and dissonance and anger, just energy, conceptualized energy, and I had this moment of clarity which meant I was magnified. I'd got more energy than most people, so I just couldn't get it down on the paper quick enough. So when you hear it said, it sounds like there's a lot going on. Of course there is.
I missed out a lot of stuff as well. So before we get into your story, the way that I start the show is I ask everyone, because we are called Unbroken, the podcast, is what does the word unbroken mean to you, Geoff?
It means that's what I am. I'm unbroken, despite what happened to me. And perhaps because of what happened to me, I feel like I'm the ore that tungsten is made from. If you look at a light bulb, the little thin wire of tungsten that connects the negative and positive pole has a very high melting point, and that's because it's been put through trauma, it's been put through fire, it's been put through chemical processes, it's had a regeneration program in order to give it this impossibly high melting point. I'm unbroken because of my trauma, not despite it.
Absolutely. So you already started in the introduction by saying that you were abused, and I know you were 11, and it was by one of your martial art teachers.
Yeah, I mean, I was this kid that was going to change the world. I had such ambitions, and I was so excited to write at the beginning, and just to, trip the light fantastic. I really wanted to do things in my life. And that was interrupted at the age of 11 because I started my martial arts journey. I was the prize student. I was the #1 student. The teacher was all over me. I just thought it's because I'm good at what I do. I idolized him. I would say I loved him. He was this big lump of a man. He was very impressive, very charismatic. And of course, I didn't realize until later that he was not just grooming me, but gaslighting me as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because for many, many years after I was abused, I blamed myself and found reasons to blame myself. We just had this one night where he said, we're all going to get together and we're going to come into the club. It's going to be great. We're going to fix the Aikido mats. And then we're going to stay over and camp out. We might even sleep on the trampoline. How would that be? And I'm like 11, so I'm like, sleeping on the trampoline, that's amazing.
Yeah, as an 11-year-old, you're innocent and naive, and you thought, great, a sleepover.
I was so excited, and I was so excited about my journey as well, because I was, and I don't mean this to sound like I was bragging, I was just very natural at the Aikido. It naturally took me, and I was much more advanced than the grades I was getting. So I knew there was some potential there. We had this sleepover, but when I got there, I recognised that all the other kids weren't there. There was things going on in the centre, and there were things happening, but the other kids weren't there. And I can remember a feeling of it didn't feel right, but I'm not old enough to articulate that. And you just do not doubt the man you idolise. Then in the middle of the night, I woke up with a hand on my leg. My pyjamas were all undone. My genitals are out, and this hand was the weight of this hand coming over from the back. I couldn't see a face. Obviously, I was sharing this room with this particular guy and one of his friends. Massively suspicious when you look back, but I had no idea. I was so naive. I hadn't even kissed a girl, and I felt the terror of this leg waking me up and advancing, and it was heavy. And it was disembodied, and I was so afraid. I can't even articulate, I was so afraid. And I don't know how I did it, but I found the courage to lift the hand off, the hand came back. I lifted the hand off, the hand came back. It wasn't the sexual abuse that destroyed me, it was the betrayal, it was the abandonment. And then the next day, I was bereft. I went to bed, I was 11 years old. I woke up the next morning, and I was 100. And when I woke up in this room, how you wake up for a second and, you're on the great earth.
Forget for a minute, yes.
Yeah, you just don't realise. Everything was great. And then I woke up and there was this mouth touching mine. So I was lying like this, and this mouth, this face, this huge face, this huge unshaven face was so close. His nose and lips were touching mine. And I knew he was pretending to be asleep, but I knew he was awake. I innately knew. So I woke up feeling okay, and then I just felt this terror again, and then just had to move away from that. About an hour later, when we were having breakfast, we stopped over at the boys' club, and I said to him, he said, "Are you okay? You look a bit quiet." I said, "Somebody was touching me in the night." And he laughed and just said, "Oh, he's probably dreamed it, like I'd fantasized it, like I'd fantasized." I think he thought he was developing a relationship. He obviously wasn't mentally stable, and I broke down, and I can't even describe the feeling. I've never been able to recover the feeling. It was just trauma. It was just this internal trauma where your life is never going to be the same again.
Well, one minute your world is safe, and then that's taken away from you, isn't it?
Safe,
and your world is no longer safe.
It was not safe, not even from the people I loved, especially the people I loved. That's what made it worse, because it gave me no place to hide, no place for sanctuary. There was no refuge at all. The moment he saw how distraught I was, he panicked. and then said things like, well, don't tell your mum and dad, you know how strict they are. There's no danger. He didn't need to tell me that. I wasn't going to tell my mum and dad anyway. My mum was Irish Catholic, so we were weaned on, do not bring shame to the door.
And you didn't speak about it with them?
No, not for a good while, no. And, you know, we were all part of this conditioning. So I was so ashamed. I looked like a little girl. They used to call me a puff at school. Forgive the language, but that's what they used to call me. And
you used to hate being called pretty girl, didn't you?
Yeah, I hated all that. And so there was no way I was going to, you know, there's no way I was going to tell anybody. So that kind of interrupted my journey. Later, what I realized after a lot of internal investigation, after a lot of internal dialectics with myself, with my higher self, I recognized that the adverse forces, the natural negative energies in the world, interrupted my path at a pivotal time. So they kind of tried to kill my consciousness at an early stage because they knew I'd got something important to do. That's what I recognized in myself. So that was a good sign. It also, I recognized that it triggered lots of depressions later, psychotic jealousy, self-harm, sexual self-harm, things I was deeply
that was
deeply ashamed
to
of.
read about in your book, because I read your book, Notes from a Factory Floor. The impact of the trauma, what it did to you, not just your mindset, but what you went to then do to yourself. It was tough to read.
It's very, the reason I wrote it so viscerally and so honestly is because I know it blackmailed me for a long time, and that was part of me not being able to share it because I felt so ashamed.
And it is very visceral when I read your book. I didn't really read it, I felt your book. I could feel you kind of coming off the pages. It was a very energetic book, if that makes sense. It was really alive when I read it.
I think it's because I let it come straight from a place of truth. I didn't edit anything, and I know there'll be kids out there who will be dissonant because they will feel ashamed of what's going on in their body. They won't realize they've been hijacked. They won't realize that there's a parasite being implanted in them. So I thought, if I can share it with people and be vulnerable, that it'll encourage them to share, and it'll encourage them to be vulnerable. I realized that we only really connect at that level of vulnerability. Most people talk superficially, through filters, through masks. The only way we really engage at the deepest level is when we're all vulnerable. So if I can start as an author, as a hard man of repute, supposedly, as someone that has a platform, if I can say these are my vulnerabilities, it can encourage people and give them permission to share their own secrets, because we're as sick as our secrets, aren't we? And
it's a bit of a paradox, really, isn't it? Because we all think we shouldn't be vulnerable, and yet when we are vulnerable, that's where we grow.
Yeah, there's a lovely thing in I think it's Romans in the New Testament. When I'm at my weakest, I'm at my strongest.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so when we're at our weakest, we allow this other energy, you could call it God, or you could call it Chi or Ki or Pneuma, whatever you want to call it. But when we're vulnerable, and in other words, when the ego has collapsed, it allows this other energy to come through. So the restriction of what happened to me, the restriction to what has happened or happening or happens to the kids out there listening to this, can be a blessing. It can be a gift, because it will force you to turn inwards and find out higher source of remedy or antivirus. And that higher source of remedy and antivirus is compassion. Yeah. Compassion for yourself, compassion for other people, even compassion for the people that abused you. Because that's the remedy. That's how you get rid of them. That's what dissolves it. It robs hatred of its power, compassion. But we have to find that. But our human nature is set in a place of compassion. It's not like we've got to find compassion. It's there already. It's not like we've got to create compassion for someone that's hurt us. That can be very difficult. We've got to find the part of us that is compassion, that will come through, and nothing else can exist in that space, because that would be seen as in the Quran, they call it akarim, aramin, which means the all-compassionate one. It's seen as a remedy or an attribute of divinity. and this attribute comes down, and it is absolutely like an antivirus. It dissolves everything below it. So when we access the part of us that is compassion, that is love, it automatically dissolves hatred. It breaks the bond between us and the people that abused us. It forces them to separate themselves so that they have to face reciprocity. It allows us to wander off and repair or return back to our natural homeostasis. That is possible. Even if it's not probable, it's possible because I've done it and you've done it.
Yeah, I'm a psychotherapist, and I've had a very similar journey too. So I've sat in both chairs. So I have been through, we've had similar stories. For those people that know my story will know that mine also ends in one of forgiveness, forgiving the 2 men who gang raped me when I was just 13. So we've had a similar journey, and I first knew about you from watching a video from the Forgiveness Project, where we are both stories, and you just speak to the camera and you share your story. And the very first time I watched it, like your books and like your films that I've watched this week, it just shot an arrow into my heart.
No, thank you.
It really did. But
well,
this is a process, really, isn't it?
Say again?
It's a process, really. You didn't get to this place overnight.
It's unfolding. It's beautifully unfolding. It isn't just unfolding; it's unfolding infinitely.
Yes.
It's like the abuse, or that was very traumatic, led me on a path of inquiry that gave me a seed. It gave me a seed of something, and I'm unpacking that seed. That seed is like, if you look at an acorn, within an acorn there's a tiny seed, and within that tiny seed is the potential. If it unfolds and it's nurtured, it can unfold and create a 500-year-old, 200-foot tree that will create another 1,000,000 acorns with the same unfolding process. So I'm very excited because it took me, the level of inquiry, the avenue of inquiry it took me on, created a seed of that needed just to be unpacked and unfolded, which I do through the talks, through the writing, through the films. And each time I unfold it, I'm finding more and more out about who I am, where I come from, what my logos is, what my purpose is. And recognizing that if I can unpack that seed, it will also develop other seeds. And of course, a million potentials on one tree is also 1,000,000 potentials from each of those 1,000,000 potentials. So there's 1,000,000,000 potentials, just, well, it's infinite. So the trauma and the crisis, obviously in the early days, it led to all of the things we talked about, the vulnerabilities, an abandonment schema, which I had. I mean, I never knew it till I started to write and study. I had an abandonment schema. I did a master's degree in the psychology of martial arts. When I bumped into abandonment schema, it was like it was a letter to me, like it was describing my life. I was so, sometimes, Madeline, if my wife left the room, if she left the room on my bad days, I felt she was betraying me. Why wouldn't she betray me? I was worth nothing, because the people who had loved me as a kid had told me that. This teacher who I idolized had told me that. Don't trust anybody. And of course, when I eventually did share it, I got the second abuse, which was doubt. And maybe the doubt wasn't meant from the people that gave me the doubt, but I was so sensitive. I was paranoid. I saw doubt in a hesitation. So somebody asked me, I just want to make sure you didn't lead him on.
Yeah, I remember reading that or watching it. And one of the things that I've seen,
I'm 11. Yeah. I'm 11. What do you mean lead? I don't even understand what, I sat in dissonance, cognitive dissonance, for so many years. It wasn't until I wrote my play, Fragile, that I was able to unpack that and put it in front of this kind audience who helped me to clean it over the space of 2 weeks. It went national and then it went international. It went into Germany and places like that. But the audiences helped me to clean it. But,
it was very uncomfortable reading about how you were sitting as an audience member watching your story, because every play, every book, every article, I call it cleaning up, you call it cleansing, has been a way to, expose the abuse, cleanse it, remove another layer. And
Yeah.
Fragile seemed the most potent because
Yeah.
you wanted to run. You could hear all your insecurities rising up. But for your family,
So
to hear your thoughts out loud, it was really uncomfortable to hear you being so unsettled by watching it.
Yeah, I was very unsettled. In fact, the morning the play was due to start, I broke my ribs.
Yes.
Training, everything was trying to stop me from getting to that theatre, but there was nothing going to stop me. But the first time I told my wife about my own self-abuse and the sexual self-abuse was when I wrote that play, because she said, "Why are you so uneasy about this play? You're not normally this bad." I said, "Because there's things in here that have been blackmailing me for a long time that I've never revealed, but I wasn't really consciously aware that they were hidden. They were just a part of my life that nobody knew about." And it was almost like two separate personalities. And she said, "Well, what was that?" And I told her, and she said, "But you didn't do that though, did you?" And I said, "Yeah, but I did. I did. That's the thing." So telling my wife, letting my kids watch it, terrified that my mum would read it or come and watch it. I was probably the most frightening thing I've ever done. And of course, my false ego, the adverse forces, the voices of society were saying, "You're going to go there and it's going to be another abuse. You're going to get battered. These people are going to think you're disgusting." And all, when they find out what you've done and who you are, I'm not kidding you. After the first showing of the play, people were weeping, people were embracing me.
Yes, I read about people wanting to hug you. And you also have the Samaritans on the door, didn't you? Because
the Samaritans on the door every night.
Trauma, yeah.
Yeah, but it did the opposite.
Well, I think when we step into our shame, that's how we shatter our shame. That's what
that's very true. That's absolutely true.
I think we can never go to revealing how we used to sexually self-abuse ourselves is a shameful thing, or we believe it to be shameful. But when we step into it and bring light to our shadows, it changes stuff. It really changes stuff.
And we can't return home, because for me, this is about refuge and repair. Is about returning home. In other words, returning to homeostasis, returning to our natural balance. But we can't return home if we continue to self-abuse, or if we continue to act out the things that have been implanted in us. So this hot coal of abuse is like a parasite that's planted in you, and the abuser takes something from you, a part of your soul, your innocence, your autonomy. He takes your will, certainly a big part of your will, and he replaces it with the hot coal of abuse, which is a very powerful negative cognition, a belief that nobody can be ever trusted again. And of course, that's every time you self-abuse, you underline that, because you don't even trust your own hands. You don't even trust yourself in the dark. You don't want to be in the dark. You don't want to be in the shower on your own, because you don't trust this body. And you don't. It's only when you start to write about it and you start to intercourse with it, start to lean into the sharp edges. Ushabu would say that we absorb 99% of it and sit and watch it. It's only when we do that we realise that it isn't us that's doing it. It's something that's been implanted in us, and we have the ability to heal that, but not while we still continue to do it. So we can't return home while we're walking away from home. So writing about it enabled me to stop doing it, enabled me to recognise what was happening. Forgiving the person who abused me enabled me to break the bond that he'd created. So he'd created a bond when I was 11. I didn't see him for 20 years, but that guy was still abusing me on a weekly basis, because every time I thought about him, I would be invaded by all of this imagery, all of this shame, all of this dissonance. So he was feeding off my seminal energies. When I forgave him, it wasn't that I was trying to let him off. I didn't have the ability to do that. Reciprocity settles its own accounts. What I needed to do was give him back to the law of compensation, give him back to his own karma. In doing that, I was able to retrieve what he'd stolen from me and give him back the hot coals of the abuse. So I was able to do that only by forgiving him. when I forgave him, I was in a position where I could have been physically violent because I'd developed the skills to do that. But I knew that if I was physically violent in any way, I would have just fed what was in me. I would have created a stronger bond between us. He'd have continued to feed off me even in his absence. So when I forgave him, I felt the bond break. I felt him fall away. I felt relief. I had a long period, as you rightly said earlier on, I had a long period then of repair. It's a process. And he went off and had to face his own karma. And he would have been left with choices. And the choice he took was that he killed himself. And I knew I'd fix myself when I heard he'd killed himself, and I felt compassion. I knew I was home when I felt compassion, because he couldn't harm me, he couldn't hurt me anymore, and I felt genuine compassion for a life wasted. At some level, everyone is a victim. He would have been a victim of something. There's no doubt. You don't become distorted.
I do believe that hurt people hurt people.
Yeah. So for me, it was about breaking that bond and about repairing. And the writing has been, I think that's part of the reason I've been so prolific as well, is that every time I do a book and unpack a little bit more, it gives me more seeds to unpack. So it's not just about healing, it's also about going back to what I was when I was 11, this excited kid who's on the great earth and wants to explore. So I'm back in that place of excited curiosity where, you know, I don't know what the muse is going to bring me next. So it's no longer, I'm not that, there's always something to repair, I think, because we're living in the world, but I'm not repairing massive damage. You know, I don't have those rushes of passions anymore. I don't have those feelings invading me. They're gone. That parasite is left. But I am in the world, and I am creating, and I'm telling the story again and again in the hope that somebody will pick up a book or an article or listen to this and think, that's me. And it will encourage them to begin their own journey of repair.
Absolutely, because before you got to this place, we kind of haven't really talked much about it. You were very angry, and you were very violent and very insecure, and you call it the voice, your negative internal chatter spoke to you pretty much a lot of the time. And facing your fears, which is what led you to become this bouncer for 10 years, I think it was.
Yeah, because of the abuse, I suffered a lot with depression. I was self-abusing, so I was always bashing my hands up. I was always, you know, I would stab stuff in my hands. I suppose it was a way of being disgusted with myself, but also trying to release some of the pain.
I couldn't watch that scene in Retaliation.
No,
that was
no.
watch with the
Yes.
I won't give too much away, but yeah.
No, I just wanted to bring everything to the paper. I wanted to bring everything to the paper. There's one scene in Retaliation as well that we won't go into on this, but there's one particular scene, a self-abuse scene, a sexual self-abuse scene, that even the people making the film would just talk about it as that scene.
Yes.
No, they didn't want to mention it, but I wanted to bring out all of the things that blackmailed me, all of them. I wanted to bring them to light. If I bring them to light, they become light. That way they're clear, they're out of me. And that way they permission other people to talk about the things that they can't talk about. When I studied psychology, a lot of the things I was experiencing weren't mentioned or weren't written about, or maybe they were in the exegesis or in some of the deeper books, but I wasn't finding people talking about what I was experiencing. So that left me thinking, this is just me. I'm just a perversion. So I wanted to say to people, this happened because of that. You know, it left me with an unhealthy addiction to sexual pornography. It left me with a sensitive, sympathetic nervous system, so I was very easily aroused to anger, you know, to lust, any of the passions, and had no, because my will had been stolen from me at the age of 11. I didn't have enough will left, enough strength to actually stop that from happening. It was only when I started to understand it and started to literally to remove it and bring it to the paper, not just bring it to the paper, but transform that base energy into something beautiful. So although the
I
films and the
think
plays are
that,
visceral, they're beautiful.
yeah, I think that the anger, from me, from a therapist point of view, it just covers up all our hurt and disappointments. It's so much easier to be angry, or we think it's easier to be angry, but there's a price that we pay with our anger.
Very true. We're in the world, aren't we? We're gonna create causes with our anger, and those causes have consequences. If I'm angry at my wife, that doesn't exist in a vacuum. If I'm angry at a guy in road rage, I was violent for nearly 10 years, thinking that was a good outlet. I'll go on the door and protect myself and protect other people from these abusers in the world. But of course, I didn't realize until later that they were just projections from my own psyche, from my own damaged filters. So I was creating monsters, forgetting that I'd created them, and then developing techniques, physical techniques, to defend myself against the very monsters that I'd created and forgotten. Once I realized that, I was able to stop doing that as well. So my life went from being violently displaced to a life of center and peace and creativity. As you said, it's taken time.
It's quite contrastingly different, really, isn't it? From love and compassion to one of really violence. Can you speak about the moment when you stumbled across your abuser, when you were out in a cafe?
Yeah, I'd been very violent for a long time, and I'd got a reputation for being a very nice guy, very articulate, bolding, quiet. But when it kicked off, I was knocking people out left, right, and centre. I was hugely violent. I was very ignorant, but I was justifying that violence as well. I was knocking monsters out. They were monsters. They deserved what they got.
Mm-hmm.
But then the next day, I'm walking through the city centre, and I see one of those monsters that I've battered, and he's walking through the town with his two daughters and his wife. And the kids are holding the pram, one at each arm of the pram, and the wife's walking behind him, surveying what's left of her husband's face. And I am distraught. I'm distraught because I'm thinking, I didn't batter a monster after all. I battered a daddy. Yep. I battered a husband. I battered a factory worker.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't dehumanize people anymore. I realized that they were monsters because I was creating monsters. So I started to see that these were real people and this was real damage. And I was creating, I was putting a negative output into the world. I felt deeply sad, but also just was racked with conscience. So I started to study the esoteric end of martial arts, the hidden realms. And I started to bump into the what they call in the Quran the greater jihad, the internal cleansing, the internal war. And I started to bump into things like repentance and regeneration and things like forgiveness. And I was excited by that. And I was recognizing that there was a singularity in me, and if I could find that singularity, not only would I not have to defend myself, there'd be nothing to defend against, because nothing would exist in that proximity if I was centered. The whole, as the I Ching says, the whole world surrenders to a quiet mind. So I was excited by that. I wanted to look at that. So then I found myself sat in this cafe I think it was a Sunday morning, and I was 16 stone. I got a face like 10 boxers. I could have a fight. I was a world-renowned martial artist, and I looked across, and there he was, the guy that abused me when I was 11, sat at the table opposite. And it was the universe saying to me, well, here he is. This is your chance to practice. The lesser jihad, the lesser battle, is when we go out and roll up our sleeves and make our fists. The bigger battle is when we go in and find the source of that conflict within us. We go in and we find the hidden Nazi, as they call it. We go in and find the part of us that's creating this mayhem. So it's saying, this is your chance. And I felt my physical prowess fall off me like a coat, literally just draped off me. And I was 11 again, and I was trembling, and I felt violent rage come up. I felt fear come up. I felt terror come up. I was back in that bed again. I wanted to run away.
You were back to being 11, really, weren't you?
I was 11. All the armour had gone. It's not that I couldn't have a fight. I just knew, I innately knew it wouldn't work. I innately knew that if I was physical with this guy, I would never get rid of him. So this few yards between me and him felt like a no man's land, and getting out of my chair felt like I was climbing out of a dugout with a bayonet and a rifle, and I had to cross this. It was probably the single hardest thing I've ever done, because I knew I wasn't going to go over and be physical with him. I knew I was going to forgive him. I was going to try and forgive him. So I went over and I stood above him, and he looked up at me and didn't recognize me. And I just said, "You don't remember me, but you abused me when I was a boy." I said, "You need to know that," I won't swear, but you need to know that you smashed my life up. You smashed it up. And he went to stand up, and I said, "Sit down." Commanded him to sit down. I was working from my centre now. I was at this soul place. So he felt this command. He sat down. I said, "I want you to know that I forgive you. I forgive you." And I said it twice. I underlined it, because that, you know, the first one was for him, the second one was for me. I mean this. I wanted to know that I've got the ability to be physical with this person, and that I knew innately that it wouldn't work for me, and that I needed to separate myself from him. I needed to break the bond, and the only way I would do that would be to forgive him. And forgiveness in the sense of giving him over, breaking this bond, this unholy bond, and giving him over to reciprocity. I had enough understanding of causality to recognize, and I'd had enough experience in the world to recognize that nobody escapes the consequences of their actions. Even though we popularly like to think they do, I know firsthand that they don't. At some
even
point,
if they're not aware, it's going to affect them on a subconscious level. It's going to seep out in some way.
yeah, even their skin speaks the testimony against them. They carry it everywhere. You know, it's not hard to see if you look at it. So I trusted that, and I went to walk away, and he stood up, and he put his hand out, and I remember his hands were trembling like that, and he wanted me to shake his hand. And I didn't know until many years later. I innately knew, but I didn't know till many years later that what he was saying was, "I accept your forgiveness." In other words, he said, "I accept that you're going to throw me back into the abyss of karma, and I'm going to let you go so you can repair." That's what I know happened. That him asking me to. That's why when we did Retaliation, we called it the handshake film, because the handshake was the pivotal moment in the film. If he doesn't shake his hand, it means he hasn't forgiven.
Yeah.
He was saying, but also in Romans 12:20, when you see the actor James Smiley, he does this thing when he puts his hand out to the character to shake it after he's been forgiven. You see James Smiley, the priest, look at him and just a little tiny subtle nod. "Yeah, please shake my hand. Please shake my hand. I'm letting you go so you can repair, and I'm accepting the consequence of what I do, because you're going to give me back to karma." From the priest's perspective, you're going to give me back to God. So I knew that's what happened on a metaphysical level. I shook his hand, I moved away, and that was the beginning of a 20-year repair.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so much that the damage at the age of 11 was so irreparable, it's that it wasn't captured early, and I'd got like 30 years of decision making in the world that was all directed by the abuse as an 11-year-old. So every decision I made after that age was directed by the false beliefs that he'd implanted in my head. So I've made a lot of mistakes.
Through the lenses that you wore at that time of the trauma,
Yeah.
don't you? And it's all through those lenses until those lenses are removed and you see it differently.
Thanks. And I've hurt a lot of people. That doesn't go away just because you forgive somebody. I'd battered people. I kicked people's teeth out. These were brothers, and these were uncles, these were fathers, these were sons, you know. They were monsters when I hit them, but they weren't in retrospect. And in doing that, I damaged my own soul or my own psyche. That isn't just going to go just because I found forgiveness. That's in the plumbing. That's stored in memory banks in every cell of my body that needs to be atoned. So all of the actions I'd created over 30 years sent me into a place of division. You know, when they say you've got a devil in you, it comes from the word devil comes from, or demon comes from the word divide. So I'd been divided several times. So I was multiple personalities in here, all acting through the same lens. And I'd created a lot of damage, and that was stored. So that I needed to become one again. So atonement for me meant getting at one moment, coming back to that singularity, that one self. So the process then was me going, I didn't deliberately go out and want to be violent. Because of, you know, through my filters, I thought I was doing the right thing, but I wasn't doing the right thing, and I'd left damage in the world that needs to be cleaned up. So for the next, I don't know, since then, that was probably for the last 20 years, I've been cleaning, and I've gone through some, as you know, as a therapist, I've been through some painful regenerations.
Yeah.
I'm not typical. Most people who've been abused won't have the trauma I've had, because they won't have had, you know, nearly a decade of violence as a bouncer, where there's a lot to be cleaned up. And I want to stipulate that I wasn't being punished. There was no deity in the sky, no jealous God punishing me. I was just being given the opportunity to cleanse and find my own singularity, my own geometric point, that only point of reference I had lost. So I started to write very painful things like Fragile, like Romans 12:20, like Retaliation, and Notes from a Factory Floor. I mean, I pretty much had a breakdown after writing Notes from a Factory Floor.
Yeah, I could imagine that would be, yeah.
And you're looking at all your sin.
I felt like I'd been put in a washing machine after I read that.
putting in a cement mixer with a couple of bricks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. But I recognised as well that in the Old Testament they talk about burnt offerings, they talk about animal sacrifice, and of course it's allegorical. So Notes from a Factory Floor was me looking at all of those errors, all of those mistakes, all of those, all of the damage I'd done to people, and it was me burning them up in the volition of writing that book. So that was my burnt sacrifice. I was sacrificing the animal soul, the lower ego, in order to cleanse myself. And I actually took myself away for 5 years on a sabbatical, my exile period, because I knew I was being asked to do this, and I knew I would have to go through all this. So after I wrote Notes, I finished 150,000 words on the Friday, and 20 chapters downloaded in my head for a new book called The Divine CEO, which came through me, another 150,000 words over the next 6 to 8 weeks. And that was stuff I didn't know I knew. That was new stuff coming through a clean vessel. Then I had this period of regeneration.
That's when you are completely in your flow, or whatever you want to call it. That I feel very much the same. I feel like I vomited my book. I don't know where the words came from. It just came through me. Somebody downloaded it into me, and you're in your flow. You've kind of integrated everything. Yeah. And it's you at 11, but it's more than you at 11, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you've got that.
For all of you to turn up, the you that was always there.
Yeah, all of that experience. And now I'm just being given seed after seed. Unpack this. Books arrive, tomes arrive, teachers arrive. I just follow the serendipities. I follow the signs. The little, you know, in the Old Testament it says your soul will teach you. Yeah. But what it's saying is you will get an inner tutor. Fine, sat nav, move, step forward, step back, say yes, say no, walk away, run away, embrace this, push this away. It will tell you exactly what to do.
You very much talk about that those people that fail to risk, they really fail to grow. And it's really about, and we could speak here all day about your fear pyramids, you know, facing your fears, because our fears really hold us back. But it's about taking those risks in order to grow.
Yeah,
not staying stuck.
If there's no risk, there's no reward. Yeah. What I learned from climate, I built a fear pyramid for people that don't know it. I wrote a fear pyramid down and wrote all my fears on the pyramid, least fear on the bottom step and worst fear on the top step, because I was assailed by depressions, assailed by them. So I decided to confront everything I was afraid of. And I recognized that when I turned into it, I turned into the different fears and intercourse with them and embraced them, invited them in. Instead of running away from them, I ran towards them and leaned into them. All of the fears, most of them just dissipated immediately as soon as I turned into them. Some of them I had to completely intercourse with. but they all dissipated. And when they dissipated, it was like the nature of the fear was liberated, and the effulgence that it was holding came across to me, and I expanded, and I knew a little bit more. I understood a little bit more, and I was able to go to the next fear. And each time I was able to reclaim that part of myself, I expanded a little bit more.
And this is the part that resonated with me, because I discovered by the same process, my fears were my imagination. It was all my negative chatter holding me back. You can't do that because that will happen, this will happen. So I intentionally put myself into situations that terrified the shit out of me. And I realized, actually, I'm okay. It's all right.
Yeah. Well, it's like St. Francis, when he first finds the spiritual path, and his dad doesn't like the path he's taken, so his dad takes a team of guys and batters him and throws him in a dungeon. And he says, I'm in the dungeon and I'm assailed by 5 demons, and they would be the demons of his internal voices. And he says to these demons, if you're here, it's ordained, so carry on, do your worst, do your worst. So he said they got worse. So he said he turned to God and he said, thank you for this opportunity to grow. Thank you for this opportunity to see manifest the fears that are hiding in me. Please bring me more. I want more of this. Boom. They disappeared. Milarepa, the Buddhist murderer turned saint, he's in his cave. He's been contemplating for years and years. He comes back to his cave after scavenging for some food and finds a team of demons in his cave, and he suddenly thinks, I've got to get rid of them, I've got to go, I don't know how to get rid of them. And then he realizes he's engaged fear. So he just wanders into the cave and he says, sit down, stay as long as you want. I'm not in any hurry. If you want to stay here, stay here. Bring whatever you've got and I'll bring what I've got. Let's see who exists. And they disappeared. This is what happened to me. The moment I turned into my fear and said, come in, sit down, have a cup of tea. Do you want to meet my wife? Stay as long as you want. Because every time I was urgently wanting them to go, they got fatter and they stayed longer. When I didn't care whether they stayed, when I said stay as long as you want, when I was certain I wasn't bothered about them being there, they couldn't exist anymore. They fed off my engagement. They fed off my identification.
It's where we then put our attention, isn't it? Where we put our attention. If we're focusing on them all, then they're going to grow bigger. When we fight them, they get bigger. But when we just go, okay, it's fine.
Have a look at you. Let me have a look at you.
Come on in.
It's that's what I learned, is that life, reality exists at the level of engagement.
Yes.
The thoughts, we think of thoughts as something that are in us. They're something that are ours, but actually thought is a separate realm. It's like gravity. It's there. They're floating around, and we have the facility to be able to observe them and choose whether we engage them or not, or choose whether we identify with them or not. Because the moment we identify with a thought, the moment we engage it, we are incarnated into that thought. That thought becomes our persona. We act in the world. We create karma with those actions, or we create reciprocity with those actions. We come back, that thought recedes away, and our caretaker self is left there thinking, what have I done? I wasn't myself. I was out of my personality. So you start to recognize that it's not about controlling thought. It's about controlling whether we engage thought.
Yes.
It's not about controlling thought. It's because the moment we try to control thought, we're wrestling with thought. This is about choosing whether we identify with it. Is this a kind thought? Is it a good thought? Is it going to be creative? Is it going to be anabolic? If it's not, then I'm going to choose not to engage it. I mean, of course, I'm talking about like an Olympic level of play where we suddenly have enough awareness and enough control of the singularity of the center point to say, there's all the thoughts, and these are the ones I'm going to choose to engage. We can find this magic pot. The Japanese Aikido people call it the magic pot, the dantian, just below the navel. And if we can center ourselves in that one point and find a still mind, everything will eventually be drawn into it and just dissipate. So that's the practice. It's not, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's there and it's available, and it's in all of the, it's in all of the esoteric martial arts, but it's also in all of the exegesis of the esoteric works of religion. I'm not talking about the revealed books, but the hidden books, you know. So it's then it's just about practice. So we're no longer guarding the door of a nightclub, we're guarding the door to our heart. And again, in allegorical terms, the heart was classified as the will, the kingdom, the land. The word land goes back to the root word will. So when they say enter the land, the promised land, the kingdom, the land of milk and honey, what they're saying is enter your own will, control your own will. So when we get control of our own will, we can start to choose whether we engage a thought or identify with a thought or not.
Yeah, but you say in your book, do the work, and the doors will open.
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfectly what you're, when I read a book, I often take notes, just a few notes on my Kindle. With your book, I took 44 notes. And I'm trying to think of a good one that we can end this with. There's so many that I loved. And actually, it's the Rumi ones that always speak to me. So there's two Rumis. Rumi spoke in my ear. He told me that birds make great circles with their freedom. How do they learn it? They fall, and in falling, they are given wings. Well, you certainly have your wings, Geoff, and you are flying and shining your beautiful light for everybody. So I'm just so grateful for you taking the time out and speaking.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That's really kind of you. And I'm a massive admirer of you. I love your story. You're so courageous. You gave me courage. Looking at your story, you gave me inspiration.
Well, it was someone else that gave me courage, and I realized courage is contagious. So like you, if I can step into my darkest shadows and reveal it with all the details and give someone else the chance to find their voice and start to heal their journey, we're on a very similar path, really, aren't we? Yeah,
you speak beautifully as well. You have there's a kindness and a timbre to your voice that is healing on its own.
Well, and we'll end with another Rumi then, because we can't have too many Rumis in one day. As Rumi once said in a fitting verse, fear knocked on the door, love answered, there was no one there.
Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you, Geoff.
Thank you.
Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeline Black, playing now on all the main platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher for Android, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and here. Play Unbroken, the podcast, with Madeline Black.